to the saddest night ever. That seems kind of odd, doesn't it? To welcome you to the saddest night ever. Normally when we think of Easter, we think of the joyful celebration of Easter Sunday, right? But before we can celebrate, we journey through the saddest night ever. This night, also known as Maundy Thursday, is the night before Jesus' death. We use this service to remember him and the saddest parts of getting to Easter Sunday. As we begin, please remember that this is a time of worship. I'd also encourage you to pay attention to how this service may feel a little different than our normal worship services. I'm going to lead us in a call to worship. It's going to be a call and response. I'm going to say a line, and then I invite you to respond with, God is here. During our times of social distancing, God is here. In our time of worshiping together, God is here. In our time of praying together, God is here. In our time of hearing the stories of Holy Week, God is here. Let us worship God. Pray with me. Dear God, we come to you now with thoughts of worry or even confusion. Help us to listen, to hear your word, and to remember Jesus. Amen. I'm going to read the stories of Holy Week. As I read, I want you to watch for the different symbols to remember each story. Also notice the candles and what you think might be important about them. During the Last Supper with his disciples, Jesus took some bread in his hands. He blessed the bread and broke it. He then gave it to his disciples and said, "Take this and eat. This is my body." Jesus picked up a cup of wine and gave thanks to God. He then gave it to his disciples and said, "Take this and drink. This is my blood, and with it, God makes his agreement with you. It will be poured out so that many people will have their sins forgiven. From now on, I am not going to drink any wine until I drink new wine with you in my Father's kingdom." Jesus went to a place called Gethsemane with his disciples, and he told them, "Sit here while I pray." Jesus took along Peter, James, and John. He was sad and troubled and told them, "I am so sad that I feel as if I am dying. Stay here and keep awake with me." Jesus walked on a little way. Then he knelt down on the ground and prayed, "Father, if it is possible, don't let this happen to me. Father, you can do anything. Don't make me suffer by having me drink from this cup. But do what you want and not what I want." When Jesus came back and found the disciples sleeping, he said to Simon Peter, "Are you asleep? Can't you stay awake for just 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you won't be tested. You want to do what is right, but you are weak." Jesus went back and prayed the same prayer. But when he returned to the disciples, he found them sleeping again. They simply could not keep their eyes open, and they did not know what to say. When Jesus returned to the disciples the third time, he said, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough! The time has come for the Son of Man to be handed over to sinners. Get up, let's go. The one who will betray me is already here." Jesus was still speaking when Judas the betrayer came up. He was one of the 12 disciples, and a mob of men armed with swords and clubs were with him. They had been sent by the chief priests, the nation's leaders, and the teachers of the law of Moses. Judas had told them ahead of time, "Arrest the man I greet with a kiss, tie him up tight, and lead him away." Judas walked right up to Jesus and said, "Teacher." Then Judas kissed him, and the men grabbed Jesus and arrested him. Simon Peter followed Jesus, staying by the gate to the building where they took him. A girl at the gate said to Peter, "Aren't you also one of the disciples of that man?" "No, I am not," answered Peter. It was cold, so the servants and guards had built a fire and were standing around it. Peter went over and stood with them. One of the guards said to him, "Aren't you also one of the disciples of that man?" But Peter denied it. "No, I am not," he said. Then a slave of the high priest spoke up. "Didn't I see you in the garden with him?" Again Peter said, "No." At that moment a cock crowed, and Peter remembered what Jesus had told him. "Before the cock crows, you will say 3 times that you do not know me." He went out and wept bitterly. Jesus stood in the judgment hall before Pilate, the Roman governor, who questioned him closely. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked. "It is as you say," Jesus replied. To all the other questions and charges, Jesus remained silent, much to Pilate's amazement. He could not find any fault with Jesus. Because it was the custom during Passover for one prisoner chosen by the people to be released, Pilate went out and asked the crowd, "Whom do you wish me to set free? The rebel and murderer, or Jesus, the Christ?" He thought that with this choice the people would ask for Jesus. But the chief priests and counselors persuaded the crowd to ask for the other man. "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called the King of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "Crucify him," said the crowd. "Why? What crime has he committed?" he asked. But the crowd only shouted louder, "Crucify him!" Pilate shrugged. He called for a bowl of water and publicly washed his hands, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood." Then he ordered that the murderer and rebel be released, and had Jesus flogged before handing him over to the guard. The soldiers took him to their quarters, where they stripped him, dressed him in a robe of royal purple, and placed on his head a crown of thorns. Mockingly they knelt before him. "Hail, the King of the Jews!" they jeered, beating him and spitting at him. When they tired of this, they dressed him again in his own clothes, then led him away to be executed in the Roman way by crucifixion. As Jesus was led away to be crucified, he was met by Simon. At once the guards seized Simon and forced him to help carry the cross. When they reached Calvary, one of the soldiers offered Jesus a drink of wine mixed with myrrh, but he turned his head away. Then they raised him on the cross, placing above him the mocking inscription, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." The guards threw dice for his clothes before sitting down to keep watch. As people passed, they taunted the man hanging from the cross. "If you are the Son of God, why don't you save yourself?" they jeered. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Two robbers were crucified, one on either side of Jesus. One hurled insults, but the other defended Jesus. Jesus said to this man, "Today you will be with me in paradise." At noon, darkness fell on the land, a darkness which lasted until the 3rd hour of the afternoon. Then Jesus cried aloud, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Hearing him cry out, a man standing near the cross put a sponge soaked in vinegar on the end of a pole and held it up to Jesus' lips. Jesus cried out, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." Then his head fell lifeless. One of the centurions who had been keeping guard said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." And many people who were near began to feel afraid. That evening, a rich disciple named Joseph went and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate gave orders for it to be given to Joseph. He took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth. Then Joseph put the body in his own tomb that had been cut into solid rock and had never been used. He rolled a big stone against the entrance to the tomb and went away. Pray with me the prayer Jesus taught his disciples and us to pray, the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. So we've heard the stories of the saddest night ever. And it sort of feels like the story shouldn't be over. And we know that it isn't. As we depart from our time of worship, I invite you to participate in the act of the Last Supper together as a family. Consider what Jesus and his disciples might have felt like as they were saying goodbye. Did they really understand what was happening? Did the disciples know what Jesus was doing for them and ultimately for us too? And remember that while on the saddest night ever we might be sad, Sunday is coming.